of September 2019. In the spirit of reconciliation, before we begin this meeting, we acknowledge the Wadawurrung, Boonwurrung and Warrawong people of the Kulin Nation as the first custodians of the land on which this city is being built. We pay respects to elders and the diversity of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, past, present and future. Please stand for the opening prayer and welcome. We pray for guidance in the Council's decision-making to achieve the best outcome for the people of Wyndham. Please be seated. I would like to welcome members of the gallery, press, councillors and staff here tonight for the ordinary council meeting. I would also like to warmly welcome some of the current participants of Wyndham's Building Blocks Community Leadership Program who are here to observe local democracy in action. Wyndham's Building Blocks is a 13-week program that seeks to develop the leadership capacity of our local residents. The program commenced as a pilot in 2014, and since that time, more than 380 locals have undertaken and successfully completed the program, and many have gone on to do some great work in our community. I understand that the group here tonight are attending the Point Cook Neighbourhood Program and are learning key community leadership skills and theory, as well as exploring opportunities to further enhance and support council to develop ways to strengthen the Point Cook community. So thank you for devoting your time in working with us, and we wish you all the best for your community leadership journeys. Also, some of you may have noticed and seen notices in the foyer, but for those who didn't, I would like to make you aware of the following. This meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the internet. The recording will be archived and made available on Council's website. Whilst all care has been taken to ensure that your privacy is maintained, please be aware that your presence may be recorded. Also, as a reminder for all tonight, can I please request that all attendees conduct themselves in a proper and orderly manner out of courtesy for others and in the good spirit to support a proper meeting process. At these meetings, members of the public should observe the meeting in silence. If I believe that any member of the gallery is not meeting the standards set out in the Council's Governance Local Law 2013, I will call the person to order. If ignored, I have the right to remove any person from the chamber, and you can be fined and issued with an on-the-spot infringement notice of around $1,500 as prescribed in Wyndham's Governance Local Law 2013, Clause 12. Thank you, everyone, and welcome. Item 2, apologies and requests for leave. Madam CEO, do we have any apologies and requests for leave this evening?
Madam Mayor, we do have a number of those for consideration tonight. Firstly, Councillor Tony Hooper is indeed an apology for this evening's ordinary meeting of Council. So a motion is here that his leave of absence be granted, being that for Councillor Tony Hooper from the 3rd of September to the 4th of September 2019 inclusive. We also have a leave of absence request and that a motion be granted for Councillor Aaron Arn from the 5th of September to the 3rd of October 2019 inclusive. And again, noting, Madam Mayor, that Councillor Hooper is an apology for tonight's meeting.
Thank you, Madam CEO. Councillors, do I have a mover for this item? Thank you, Councillor Maynard. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Khan. I now put this motion to a vote. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Item 3, declaration by councillors of disclosure of conflict of interest, conflicting personal interests in any item of the agenda. Councillors, does anyone have any conflicts of interest that they wish to declare in relation to tonight's agenda? Thank you, Councillor Marcus.
Confidential agenda, item 13.2.
Thank you. Item 4, confirmation of minutes of previous meeting. That the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on Tuesday, the 6th of August 2019, as prepared and circulated, be confirmed, and special council meeting held on Tuesday, the 13th of August 2019, as prepared and circulated, be confirmed. Councillors, do I have a mover for this item? Thank you, Councillor Gibbons. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Khan. Councillors, I now put this motion to a vote. All those in favour? All those against? The motion is carried. Item 5, deputations and presentations. There are nil. Item 6, officers' report. 6.1, petitions. There are nil. Item 6.2, strategic reports. The next item on the agenda is 6.2.1, notice of motion Werribee Transport Study. As this is a response to the notice of motion I put at the ordinary council meeting on the 5th of March 2019, I am vacating the chair to speak to this motion. I ask the Deputy Mayor, Councillor John Gibbons, to chair the meeting for this item.
Do I have a mover for this item?
Move.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor. A seconder for this motion, Councillor Khan. Thank you, Councillor. Would any council like to speak to this motion?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Madam
Thank you,
Mayor.
Deputy Mayor. So in March this year, I put forward a notice of motion to address traffic issues in the Werribee City Centre. I was prompted to do this based on feedback from residents and business and what I was observing myself. Motorists were becoming more and more frustrated with traffic congestion, and this in turn is creating safety hazards. It was clear to me that something should be done and needed to be done. It is evident that as the city continues to grow and as we work toward developing the city centre into a true central business district, we need urgently to address some of these traffic issues. Since March, officers undertook detailed traffic studies to ensure any plan was evidence-based. What this data has shown is that whilst overall traffic volumes have not increased in recent years, we are seeing congestion during peak times, and there are local roads carrying more than expected volumes of traffic than the average local street. There are safety concerns for vehicles exiting at driveways on Sinnott Street, and importantly, approximately half of the traffic in the city centre did not have a destination in the city centre itself. We also have heavy vehicles using the city centre to access other areas of the city, and there are a range of issues with sightlines. In response to these issues, a holistic action plan has been developed that aligns to the vision for the city centre to support improved safety for all road users, pedestrians, minimise traffic impacts on local and city centre streets, maintain permeability in the precinct, support ultimate parking consolidation, and support economic prosperity. It is important to note that there are some actions that Council has direct control over, such as implementing local area traffic management treatments, and there are many actions that will require approval from the Department of Transport, as they are either proposed on declared main roads or are major traffic control items. These include, but are not limited to, a review of speed limits to improve safety, major intersection treatments, pedestrian crossing points improved, and a proposed median on Sinnott Street. For these actions, Council officers will liaise with the department to seek the necessary reviews and approvals. I think a review of the speed limit is timely and is something that is done from time to time in other parts of our municipality. It really isn't up to decide what an appropriate speed limit should be. I think we should actually leave that to the experts. Council will also develop a heavy vehicle travel plan to minimise truck movements through the city centre, and will also look at linking South Ring Road and Lock Avenue to provide an alternative route to take pressure off the local roads in that precinct. We will also review some of the parking spaces along Sinnott Street to reduce the impact on traffic movements, improve sight lines, and ensure the size of the car parks meet the standard. The action plan before us tonight presents a great way forward in terms of addressing some of the immediate traffic issues in the Werribee City Centre, and I would like to acknowledge the work of Peter McKinnon, Melissa Falkenberg and Peter Fung and the whole Transport Management team at Council for their work in responding to this notice of motion. As councillors, it is our job to represent the views of our community and to take into consideration matters relating to public safety. And our community are telling us that there are some issues in the Werribee City Centre, as is the report. I am proud to recommend this action plan to my fellow councillors tonight and look forward to seeing the implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Any further speakers to this motion? If there not being no further speak, is there any? Heather Marcus, Councillor Marcus.
Thank you. I think this is very timely, and I really would like to thank the officers for the amount of work they put in. I happen to live in the Werribee CBD, so I see it daily. I see that the traffic is now rat running and coming into roads that they never used to use, and of course it's causing a lot of congestion. I think the congestion will get a lot worse, and as the Mayor said, that there are the two bodies that have to attend to parts of the road. There are some very bad intersections, and unfortunately, if we can't get two of those addressed, I'm afraid that there could be an accident and somebody will be killed. The big trucks that pass through our city, unfortunately, because we are such a growing city, there's not much we can do about them because, you know, the soils have got to go from A to B, and the only way through is through our CBD, unfortunately. But I just think the work that's been done here is very, very good, and it's not the parking that's the problem in Werribee. Now, I drive down the street every day, and there were 17 car spaces in the post office block, and I couldn't get over it. But congestion, I think the congestion is going to get even worse before it gets better. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Marcus. Councillor McElhaney.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. The safety of all visitors to the Werribee City Centre, as well as our community that live and work in the wider precinct, is of utmost importance. This is why I'll be supporting the notice of motion, and I thank the Mayor, Mayor Shaw, for leading this motion, as I believe it is needed and being brought to this chamber tonight. There are numerous actions from the notice of motion and numerous resources required, and I also thank Interim Director Peter McKinnon, City Economy, Innovation and Livability, Melissa Falkenberg, Peter Fung for the detailed list of actions. Ensuring safety for all road users and not just motorists is the heart of many of these actions. Acknowledging the pedestrians are particularly vulnerable and require safe places to cross our roads, as well as being seen by motorists exiting the driveways in our city centre. Only a retirement village is not far away from the central business district, and often you will see elderly residents walking their trolleys. This is just one example. Minimising conflict points and reviewing speed limits is also important to align them to surrounding land use, and this will lead to less road trauma and a safer environment for all modes of travel. This can only be a positive outcome for our city centre and surrounding precinct. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor McElhaney. Any further discussion on this motion? There being none, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? It's carried. Thank you very much.
Mr. Deputy Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, for that. So item 6.3, policy and advocacy. Item 6.3.1, the draft active Wyndham strategy. The report is on pages 16 to 20. The recommendation is on page 16. The attachments are on pages 21 to 24. Councillors, do I have a mover for this item? Thank you, Councillor Maynard. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Ahn. Councillor Maynard, would you like to speak to this item?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll be short, given that the recommendations to put the document out for public exhibition. I would normally write some notes on what I would speak about an item, but I think that the first paragraph in the background quite clearly explains exactly the reasons for this. And if I may, Madam Mayor, normally I don't read things directly from the agenda, but I think in this case it's important just to reinforce that the Wyndham 2040 vision outlines the aspirations of the Wyndham community to be connected and to have opportunities to stay fit and healthy through leisure facilities like pools and gyms, clubs, lesser known sports, and just walking and cycling. And as part of this 2040 vision, this council has proposed the development of a sport and recreation that increases access for all members of the community, whether it's active or passive. And certainly this supports the provision of a diverse and adequate physical and recreational activity options by enabling the community to access, explore and enjoy facilities and programs for physical activities regardless of their location, their age, their gender, ability or affordability. So I certainly commend this document to my fellow councillor colleagues and look forward to the feedback, and when that does come back to the chamber, Madam Mayor, I will speak a little bit more on this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Maynard. Are there any other speakers on this item, councillors? Councillor Marcus?
Thank you. Thank you. I think it's quite good what we've got in front of us, but on item number 4 in the actual report, physical activity in Wyndham, as people get older, we certainly need activity, but there's one thing that is missing out of this one, and David won't be surprised when I bring it up, and that is dancing. And I believe that dancing is definitely a sport, but I will make sure that somebody puts something into this policy about dancing, because kids from years 3 through to ladies and gentlemen aged 83 can all do it. So, and there's not a lot here for people in the mature ages, not going to say old age people, mature ages. So that's just one thing that I really would like to see, and I certainly will be encouraging our older people to make sure that they put something in there about dancing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Marcus. Are there any other speakers on this item? Councillors, I now move it to a vote. All those in favour? All those against? The motion is carried. Item 6.4, Strategic and Town Planning. Item 6.4.1, Review of amended plans lodged as part of VCAT appeal for WYP 11156/18, building and works associated with the construction of 4 dwellings on a lot 3 Chirnside Avenue, Werribee. The report is on pages 42 to 50. The recommendation is on pages 43 to 47. The attachments are on pages 51 to 55. Councillors, do I have a mover for this item?
Madam Mayor, I'd like to move an alternate should this
Thank you, Councillor Maynard. Do I have a seconder for this item? A mover. I've got the first mover in, haven't I? Yes. So do I? Yes. So do I have a mover for this item? Thank you, Councillor Khan. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Barlow. Councillor Khan, would you like to speak to this item?
Thank you, Madam. I think Council have initially refused this application. Now we're approving it with the amendments. So I think it's went to the VCAT and now obviously, and I do remember that now when it came initially, there were some people having views about its overdevelopment. I think it's a great way of giving an opportunity for someone who can work with the council, and there's a few things need to amend it. I think the good thing about is no alternative layout has been done, so they will be building their 4 dwellings the way it was. So there's no alternation. There's a few modifications, but I think it's a good outcome rather than we getting litigation with a builder or a developer. I think we're sorting out things. So I hope so that my fellow councillors will support this. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Khan. Do I have any other speakers on this item? Councillor McEloney.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Look, I note the following as discussed in the report of 3 Chirnside Avenue, Werribee, in relation to the 4-unit development, and in the last report it was refused on the basis of it didn't adequately address traffic impacts, it failed to respect neighbourhood character, and it was an overdevelopment on the site and does not accord with the housing and neighbourhood character strategy or the Wyndham planning scheme. Tonight, though, I make note that the applicant is going to VCAT on the 15th on appeal and resubmitted revised plans for council. The traffic report has now been provided, and I'm satisfied with the officer's report and assessment findings, which has noted both the proposed additional movements per day and peak hour are satisfactory. I also note changes to setbacks 1, 2, 3 and 4 have increased, and note from setbacks 2, 3 and 4 have been reduced. Secluded private spaces increased on all 4 dwellings, and note attempts by the applicant to make the design more traditional in nature. I will therefore be accepting the officer's recommendation that the amended plans are supported, subject to the following conditions on pages 43 to 47. Thank you, Madam
Thank
Mayor.
you, Councillor. Do I have any other speakers on this item? Councillor Gilligan.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. I certainly echo Councillor McElhinney's points, albeit reluctantly, but nevertheless have a role as a responsible authority to make a decision where it is deemed to be in accordance with the planning scheme. In this instance, on the basis of the traffic modelling, it's evident that, in my view, it will be. Although I would make the point that I'm still uncomfortable with the nature of a driveway that is so close to a roundabout, but ultimately that is a matter of a decision of a previous planning outcome and cannot be given any weight in the circumstance of this particular planning application. And on that basis, and therefore excluding that aspect, I'm determined that I will be voting in favour of the officer recommendation this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Do I have any other speakers on this item? Councillors, I now put it to a vote. All those in favour? All those against? The motion is carried. Item 6.5, other reports. Item 6.5.1, Old Geelong Road Special Charge Scheme. The report is on pages 56 to 58. The recommendation is on page 56. The attachments are on page 59. Councillors, do I have a mover for this item? Thank you, Councillor Barlow. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Walter Villagonzalo. Councillor Barlow, would you like to speak to this item?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Very briefly, look, the report tells a story. This has been an issue for a number of years, and I know that there's businesses around the area that have complained bitterly about the amount of dust that gets blown up in the hot summer days when the winds are coming from the west or from the north, and the fact that in winter when the heavy rains come in, it becomes a bit of a quagmire with mud going out onto the road from the various businesses where customers drive in and out of the premises. The fact that we couldn't come to an agreement on a special charge scheme to have a service road installed along the front of those businesses is, of course, up to the businesses whether they wanted to support that or not. They didn't. However, I think that an outcome, as mentioned in the recommendation and in the report, is a good way to move forward on this to help alleviate quite a number of those issues about the dust or the mud onto Old Geelong Road during winter. And so I urge councillors to support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Barlow. Do I have any other speakers on this item? Councillors, I now move this item to a vote. All those in favour? All those against? The motion is carried. Item 6.5.2, Notice of Intention to Lease, Truganina East Learning Centre to Best Chance Child and Family Care Network Care Incorporated. The report is on pages 60 to 64. The recommendation is on page 61. The attachment is on page 65. Councillors, do I have a mover for this item? Thank you, Councillor Gilligan. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Barlow. Councillor Gilligan, would you like to speak to this item?
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Essentially, the resolution before us is to consider the appointment of a non-for-profit provider to manage this particular learning centre and or kindergarten. I think this is a good example of our overall kinder strategy in ensuring that we are not taking a position to offload or privatise kinders versus being very holistic around how we provide kindergarten services in a very cost-effective and good quality way. And so I certainly have heard a lot about Best Chance in terms of the provider in our city. They do a very good job, and I support the resolution and the principles that underlie it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Do I have any other speakers on this item? Councillor Khan.
Mayor, look, I've gone through the lease, so it's intention to lease for the not-profit provider. Now that which is consists of 1,168 square metre of land with a two-store rooms and 6 storerooms and number 2 rooms for consultation. It's a good project. Now, the provider we're trying to lease this facility, which is a great way to say that we are doing for the non-profit, but I do have concern about this lease for this provider. And based on my concern is, we now here signing the lease for first 6 months, they got to pay $750 for first 6 months, and then we need to go negotiate. I understand that now. I have a great passion for giving the properties, council built property, for not to the private providers, to the non-profit providers, so they can provide a better services. But here in the document where we're today voting for, we're saying going for 5-year lease and an option for 5-year lease, and then we're paying $230,000 per annum. But it's based on negotiations after the 6 months of, as per the lease document outlined. So I'm just thinking now, what happened if there is a negotiation get failed? So what happened with the rent, $230,000? Would they will be honored the rent, $230,000 per month, which is a market rate value? Also in this document now, it's called about rent increase. It says on page number 63, determined through the future negotiations. So I believe something, I know they're not for a provider, but I am voting on something which market rent increase. So I like to see the dollar value be 4% or 3% or 2%, where I'm asked to vote for it. I just have a bit concerned. So regarding this proposal, apart from this, I'm happy about it because this project about to come and build and begins, but I would like to abstaining it because based on principles, because this certain things are not clear. So I would not be voting for it, Madam Mayor.
Okay. Thank you. Just to be clear, you're abstaining from this?
Yeah, I'm abstaining.
Okay, thank you. So, that's okay, thank you. Do any other councillors would like to speak on this item? And Councillor Gilligan, you will get a right of reply. I've just clarified that. Do any other councillors want to speak on this item? Councillor Gilligan, you have a right of reply.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. It's always good to have a sparring partner in Councillor Khan for the purposes of these debates. I think it is important to put in context, Councillor Khan, what we are talking about here. If this council proposed to introduce a market rate or to substantially increase the overall rental value of these particular sites, what we are asking is to offload that cost onto working families, and in some instances, families who are doing it really tough in the city. And I think we have an obligation to, where we can, provide a subsidised service. And yes, that may involve a below market rate consideration for the purposes of leasing out these properties. But we do have in place very significant contractual obligations for non-for-profits to deliver the buildings back in the same quality that they were received as per the way in which they are required to operate. It also prevents us from having what I think would be one of the most difficult dilemmas, and that is to completely offload Kinders as an entirety, something I could not personally fathom we would do, or we would have to massively up the rates in order to cover what would have to be a cost-neutral outcome. So I think that is precisely why we deliberately deliver a below-market value, and very proudly so as part of our strategy to make sure we're delivering cost-effective early childhood education to residents in our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gilligan. Councillors, I now put this motion to a vote. All those in favour? Those against? Abstaining? Thank you. Call for a division. Thank you, Councillor Barlow. So, councillors, all those voting in favour of this motion, can you please raise your hand? Councillor Gibbons, Councillor Gilligan, Councillor McElhinney, Councillor Villagonzalo, Councillor Maynard, Councillor Shaw, Councillor Barlow, Councillor Marcus, Councillor Ahn. All those against? Abstaining? Thank you, Councillor Khan. Item 6.5.3, Wyndham Vale North Reserve Draft Master Plan. The report is on pages 66 to 70. The recommendation is on page 66. The attachments are on page 71 to 83. Councillors, do I have a move of this item? Thank you, Councillor Maynard. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Barlow. Councillor Maynard, would you like to speak to this item?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think it's a little bit like the previous one I spoke on. Council officers have gone through some extensive work evaluating what's needed in the area, spoken to the user clubs and others, and have come back with a draft document. This master plan for that site will be on public exhibition for about 6 weeks, and will come back to this chamber. And I look forward to that, the response from residents and club users and others on this document. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Maynard. Do I have any other speakers on this item? Councillor Barlow.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll probably mention the same thing as I've mentioned on previous occasions when we're looking at old facilities in the municipality. And the Wyndham Vale North Reserve used to be the old home of the, I think it's the Wyndham Vale Falcons Football Club, who moved to new facilities that we built a number of years ago. Since then, this facility has been used by a number of organisations, which include the Masters football team, which are, for those who don't know, that's teams that are over a certain age group, over 35s, and I think there might even be an over 50s team as well, which they'd have to have an over 60s team, Councillor Maynard, if I was going to play. But and so, look, I'm very much in favour. I look forward to getting the community feedback on this master plan. One of the things that I am aware of at that facility is that the rooms are quite old, and they probably do need a really good freshen up with maybe additional space. I am aware that one of the girls' marching bands or marching groups actually train inside the facility.
Drill dance.
I'm sorry?
Drill dance?
Not, yeah. Well, the marching girls, they've been using it because obviously in winter it's a bit hard for them to be marching in the on the wet ground outside. And even though the room is much smaller than the area that they would be marching in competitions, they still use it, and it's great. When I've actually been down there to view it, that there's lots of mums there with their daughters, and they're practicing. So the fact that we're looking at actually putting soccer fields into Wyndham Vale, I think, is a bonus. And even though I think there is a soccer team down there already playing, but I'm told that they bring their goals on and off the field as required. So which is pretty hard thing to do. So I'm very much in favour, and I look forward to getting more feedback from the community around there. Oh, can I just add, Madam Mayor, that this area has had a new park put in just a couple of years ago, I believe, where there's basketball and whatever, and it's also the same site that the Iramu Community Centre's on.
Terrific.
So it is a multi-purpose facility.
It most certainly is, yeah.
No netball ring.
There will be at some point.
I'm sure the recreational people will put a netball ring in there as well.
Councillors, are there any other speakers on this item? Councillors, I now move this motion to a vote. All those in favour? All those against? The motion is carried. Item 6.5.4, Outcome Community Consultation, Mandarin Suburb Boundary Realignment. The report is on pages 84 to 91. The recommendation is on page 85. There are no attachments. Councillors, do I have a mover for this item? Thank you, Councillor Khan. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor McElhinney. Councillor Khan, would you like to speak to this item?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Look, it was pretty straightforward. The council have gone out with the community consultation, and they have obviously drawn some line on the boundary, and some of the properties maybe across have gone, and maybe some people may have got upset about it because the way the boundaries has been recommended by the officers. But can I say that now, Madam Mayor, I take a great pride to be calling and knowing that Memoraborian is a great suburbs, and I do hate Wyndham Vale. I think these two suburbs are actually quite similar in the nature. They're quite new growing suburbs. So if those people might have been impacted just because of the alignment of the boundary, in terms of the property values, in terms of the branding, the name, the suburbs, I think it won't make much difference. So I will be, Madam Mayor, supporting that outcome of the officers. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Khan. Do I have any other speakers on this item, councillors? Councillor McElhinney.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Firstly, I'd like to begin by saying that I strongly support the recommendation to write to the Minister for Consumer Affairs and Registrar of Geographic Names seeking regulation of estate names to avoid issues such as this arising in the future, because what we're dealing with tonight shouldn't be happening. Unfortunately, as a council, it is important to understand we have no input into or oversight of the estate name, which is a real problem. I sympathise with the residents who have expressed a preference to remain in the suburb they purchased in, and understand why a number have at the last minute lobbied councillors, particularly last night. I probably would have done the same. However, as a councillor, I need to take into consideration all the feedback provided to me to make an informed decision. As a Safer Communities portfolio holder, I'm really concerned about the potential confusion that could be created if we go with option 1. I think it's really telling that the feedback from Ambulance Victoria, Victoria Police, Esther and the Metropolitan Fire Brigade was provided independently, yet they all came up with the same advice. This is something they deal with all the time, and we must be respectful of this. Any confusion in location can potentially mean delays in response times in an emergency, which as a councillor, I'm not prepared to accept. I don't think that the advice of all emergency service agencies is something that we can disregard. In my view, I feel I would be negligent in my duties to do so. Therefore, I will be supporting the officer's recommendation tonight, but would like to reiterate my sympathy to the affected residents. This hasn't been an easy decision. However, safety, in my opinion, needs to be paramount. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor McElhinney. Councillor Maynard.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to, Madam Mayor, before I talk a little bit further on the matter and put forward my views, provide some background in relation to this item. It is important to note that this is a process that was not initiated by council. We received a request from a developer to look at the suburb alignment in this area due to current alignment having an estate sitting over 2 different suburbs. As a council, it is our role to look at these requests and process them according to the state's geographic naming rules. This is not something we can avoid. Once we're notified, we have to go through the process. In commencing this process, it was suggested by the Office of Geographic Names that 2 boundary options should be put forward, and this is what went out for consultation. It is important to note that when considering this feedback, it is not a matter of majority rules. We have to consider the various positions put forward by all stakeholders, and when all emergency service agencies highlight concerns or concern with one option over another based on potential confusion when people are dialing 000, this is not something that I can ignore. Currently, we have no control over what the PSP plans are called and what sort of estates what sort of names developers give their estates. This is why we are going to be making the submission, as Councillor McElhinney has said. As a ward councillor, I'm not happy with the outcome for our residents, and I can certainly understand their position, because I wouldn't be happy either. But we're between a rock and a hard place, and we're bound to make a decision. And the naming of an adjoining estate being the same as a suburb is highly problematic. It is also worth highlighting that council has no control or input into what private developers name their estates, as I said. I wish we did. And
One more minute, Councillor.
And rest assured, we will be taking this issue up with the relevant state government minister, as it is our residents who are being affected by this less than ideal situation. In making my decision, Madam Mayor, I ultimately considered how I would feel if I were ever in a situation where the wrong suburb name was given to a 000 operator and it resulted in a delayed response. I'm not sure what other people would do in my situation, but this is not a risk I am particularly willing to take. So, Madam Mayor, as councillors, we sometimes have to make difficult decisions, and I certainly can assure residents this was a particularly difficult one to make. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Maynard. Councillors, do I have any other speakers on this item? Councillor Gillian.
Briefly, thanks very much, Madam Mayor. So I certainly echo the points of Councillor McElhinney and Councillor Maynard, and to some degree Councillor Khan as well, particularly in relation to the fact that we can't consider in the context of real estate valuations or indeed insurance premiums, which has been an argument that has been placed by residents as part of the submissions that have been received. I do take some issue, though, in relation to our naming policy, in particular the section that does prescribe that alterations to existing names shall not be permitted unless it can be demonstrated that there is total community support for a locality name change and the name change is needed under extraordinary circumstances. I have checked 2 Western Suburbs councils' place naming policies, and there is no such prescription that is as strongly worded as what ours is, and in some respects has actually given, in my view, some of the anger points that have been raised by the community in the view that the consultation and therefore the majority rules, as Councillor Maynard has put, creates a false expectation that that would therefore mean that it would be sufficient in order to knock off a proposed change. And it is unclear as to whether or not the Victorian legislation actually does force us to be as prescriptive as our policy is. So I do encourage that to be reviewed as part of the points that we've obviously heard in recent days. And it does sit uncomfortably with me, having read and interpreted that particular provision of the policy, but nevertheless, it does make reference to the importance of emergency services being taken into account. And as part of that, I've given significant weight to those, to that evidence base, and therefore I'm in favour of the resolution. But I don't exclude the fact that I think the community does have some grievances in relation to the way in which our policy is written. And if it is indeed able to be better aligned in that it isn't as prescriptive as that, but does give greater autonomy to us to be clearer with the community about the position that we take, then obviously that will be a better outcome for all parties. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Do I have any other speakers on this item? Councillor Marcus.
Thank you. I'll be brief because Councillor Gilligan virtually stated the paragraph on page 86 that I was going to read out regarding alterations to existing names should only be permitted when the changed name is needed under extraordinary circumstances and where the community is in total support of the change. I did raise this issue back in February about a developer choosing a name for their estate, the same as an adjoining suburb. And at that time, it was outlined that this is something council has no control over. I certainly feel for the residents who purchased their land thinking it was Werribee and now find themselves having Werribee changed to Mandarin. I looked at all of the reports and we have had feedback from the emergency services. And interesting to note that the MFB was sent their report back, but not the CFA. And this concerns me because the CFA, other people in charge of the area, most of the area here in Wyndham. So that's something that I'm quite concerned about. The other thing is that when you ring for the emergency services, as I had to because I needed an ambulance just recently, it took my daughter-in-law 5 minutes to explain where I lived. So if they want all of that type of information, and I live in the main street of Werribee, which should be very easy to find, and it took her 5 minutes to tell them exactly how to find me. I think if this is the way that the emergency services are doing such a wonderful job, making sure that they know exactly where they're going to go to get their people that are in stress, I don't have a problem with that. Also, the developers came back and gave quite a good report, and Pete submitted a detailed response, which I found very easy to understand. I felt the residents' feedback of 175 out of 550 was quite good. Of those respondents, 133 were in support of boundary option 1 and 9 in support of boundary option 2. I think we should listen to these residents as it's council's policy to work with our residents, and we always want to make sure that we go out and consult with our residents. Again, it is important that safety is considered, and I'm very safety conscious coming from the country. But I do not think that this is a strong case to go against the residents of this area. The emergency services and just recently when we did East Werribee were totally against using east, west, north and south, but it still ended up East Werribee. So I cannot vote for this recommendation. I will be voting against it. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. Do I have any other speakers on this item? Councillors, I now move it to a vote. All those in favour? All those against? The motion is carried. Thank you, Councillor Marcus. Councillor Marcus has called a division. All those for, can you please raise your hands? Councillor Gibbons, Councillor Gilligan, Councillor McAliney, Councillor Villagonzalo, Councillor Maynard, Councillor Shaw, Councillor Barlow, Councillor Arndt, Councillor Khan. All those against? Councillor Marcus, thank you. Item 6.5.5, Assembly of Councillors. The report is on page 92. The recommendation is on page 92. The attachments are on pages 93 to 97. Councillors, do I have a mover for this item? Councillor Ahn? Okay. Thank you, Councillor Barlow. The seconder. Thank you, Councillor Khan. Yeah. Yes, Councillor Ahn.
Thank you, Madam. I just want to point out there are a couple of errors in the in the last two meeting items. Hopefully, these errors can be updated.
Okay, well, I'll give you a moment. Well, do you want to put them onto the? I'll let Councillor Barlow have a. Do you want to speak to this item?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm quite happy. Well, I did move it and it's been seconded. I will, with your forbearance, allow Councillor Arndt to clarify if there's been mistakes made before I go further into it. That's all.
Thank you, Councillor Barlow. Councillor Arndt.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The second last item, so I was only apology for item 1, so that's one error, and there's another error for the last meeting. So the future focused economy portfolio committee meeting should be on 28th August instead of 22nd August. So yeah, just these two errors.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Councillor. We'll note those. Thank you.
Okay. Well,
Councillor Barlow.
thank you, Madam Mayor. With that being the situation, Councillor Arndt's clarified it. I'm just happy to move the motion and leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor Barlow. Do I have any other speakers on this item?
Sorry, can I just clarify, are we moving as amended?
We've just made a note of the change and we're moving the item as it is. We're not putting an amendment forward, but we've made a note of the changes that Councillor Arndt has wanted to do. That's correct. So it will show up in the minutes. So councillors are moving. So we've got a mover, we've got a seconder. Are there any other speakers on this item? And we've noted Councillor Arndt's changes that needed to be made, which we picked up in the minutes. Councillors, I now put this motion to a vote. All those in favour? All those against? The motion is carried. Item 7, notice of motion, nil. Item 8, council seal. Item 8.1, awarding of contract C2068/18, Laurie Emmons Motocross Track Development. The report is on pages 98 to 101. The recommendation is on page 98. Attachments are nil. Councillors, do I have a mover of this item? Thank you, Councillor Maynard. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Khan. Councillor Maynard, would you like to speak to this item?
I most certainly would, Madam Mayor. Thank you very much. Before I do, I'd just like to mention a couple of people in the Laurie Emmons Reserve Motocross Working Group members, and they are Mr. Brett Ison, Mr. Les Cameron, and Sergeant Aaron Prentice Evans from the Wyndham Highway Patrol, who had quite detailed expertise in areas of motocross tracks, and I certainly valued their input, and I think this has been a long time coming, something like 6 years it's taken, and we're about to move ahead, if council support this tonight, and start the process to, a long overdue process, I believe, Madam Mayor, to reopen the Laurie Emmons motocross track. it's all good and well to sell motorbikes, and people are free to sell most things that are legal, I would assume. But there's not much point selling motorbikes or dirt bikes in this instance and have nowhere for them to be used. We certainly don't want them in our streets or in our reserves or parks. So basically, from a groundswell of support from 2013, from this community of Wyndham and the motocross people more broadly, Council committed to reactivating the motocross facility at the Lorryman's Reserve. And whilst I have had no involvement in this track for some number of years, I did previously as a president quite a number of years ago, and certainly it's been a lengthy process and we've encountered many hurdles along the way, and just when we thought we were getting there, we would have something else pop its ugly head up. But I'm certainly pleased to say that finally the first piece of the puzzle, Madam Mayor, is in place to progress towards the track being reopened. I know that there will be many motocross enthusiasts, young and old, both male and female, who will be very happy to hear this news. Wyndham has long been supportive of mainstream sports and has invested heavily in the infrastructure to support these activities. And I think off the top of my head, Madam Mayor, I think we're committing, if this tender is let, just over $1.4 million. So I'm certainly glad to see Council is also investing in these activities such as motocross, which have more unique requirements. And it's certainly important for residents to have a diverse range of opportunities to be physically active. I look forward to following the progress of this project over the coming months, and I can't wait till this track reopens. Mind you, I'll be there to view and not ride because I can't. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Maynard. Councillors, do I have any other speakers? Thank you, Councillor Khan.
I think this is a great project. You know, every day sort of go to City Pass and always see that now the track is currently being closed. It's a part of the closure, now want to reopen it. So what we did, Madam Mayor, we started tendering process. There was 10 parties being selected through the invitation tender process. I'm glad that now that the tender, because it's about the tender, has been awarded to the party who was submitted the tender, and tender was meant to be estimated cost for that work to reopen the motor track was 1.2 million to 1.9 million. And I'm glad that officers have considered the tender very carefully and awarded the tender for the ACE from $1.4 million and $20,068. I think that shows that how carefully tender was awarded, and I'm certainly now I agree with Peter Maynard, Councillor Peter Maynard. It's a view that is being long waiting for at least for 6 years, and we had excitement, and I'm really excited to see this. This is now coming, and this project will change the game of what we're thinking. As you know, Madam Mayor, this is not a Lorryman's, it's a regional big park, which is going to have $63 million of project and over the period of time. So this will change the look of the Wyndham. Those people believe the Williams Landing and Leverton is just factories one day. When that will complete completely, we'll be like, my God, what an amazing place you'll be becoming. And this is started with it. Now, we did budgeted that one point, the amount we're tendering now. So, Madam Mayor, the tender will start tomorrow onwards, and I believe that the work will be going to be completed. I'm glad that work is being completed in January 2020. And it's also now the tenderers, the party who's going to do the work has been given a defective clause. That means they will make sure they maintain that a defective liability.
One more minute, Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. For the 12 months, they will be maintaining the defective liability of this work they will conduct. So I can't wait to see it, along with my colleague Peter Maynard, to go and see that. Now, I personally enjoy the motor track, so I love and look forward to see that the work begins and in the next month. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Khan. Councillors, do I have any other speakers on this item? Councillors, I now put it to a vote. All those in favour? All those against? The motion is carried. Councillors, item 8.2, awarding of contract C2070/18 reconstruction of Thames Boulevard, Hepburn Street and Cheville Street. The report is on pages 102 to 105. Their recommendation is on page 102. The attachments are nil. Councillors, do I have a mover for this item? Thank you, Councillor Barlow. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor McAloney. Councillor Barlow, do you want to speak to this item?
Self-explanatory, thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Barlow. Councillors, do I have any other speakers for this? Councillor Maynard.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It just shows further work that council is doing in continuing to make sure that our roads, the local roads, are up to a suitable standard, Madam Mayor, and I have no doubt that the standard of work was such that you could even drive a Ferrari on it.
Let's hope. Thank you, Councillor Maynard. Are there any other speakers on this item?
When I come back.
Yeah, no, we'll leave it at that. Councillors, I now move it to a vote. All those in favour?
The opportunity, Councillor.
All those against? The motion is carried. Thank you. Item 9, contract summaries. There are nil. Item 10, questions with notice from public gallery. Madam CEO, do we have any questions from the gallery this evening?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We do have a large number of questions this evening, mostly related to the matter considered by Council earlier this evening regarding Manburn Estate. Given the number of questions that we've received tonight, Madam Mayor, you'll need to bear with me. We have actually summarised the questions into quite a bit of detail, so I will read these out now, and certainly for the benefit of those people who have submitted questions in the gallery tonight, we will go into quite a bit of detail here. And Madam Mayor, with your indulgence, I'll also provide a response at the end of reading out the detailed questions. So if I could start by just acknowledging those members of the community in the gallery tonight who have submitted questions. I won't read you out by name. It's our policy that you are in attendance at the gallery, and given there were quite a large number of questions received, there were 14, we won't read them out individually, but rather, as I said, we've consolidated them into all of those key areas that you've raised as submitters to the questions tonight. Most people in the gallery this evening regarding the Manburn matter have lodged 2 or more questions, so we've captured these in the overall response. The questions relate to the Cornerstone estate and the impact on residents and ratepayers in this estate by the recommendation of option 2 by officers as the preferred boundary. So that's the matter that all of these questions relate to this evening. In summary, those questions raised by members of the gallery tonight relate to why the realignment is occurring now and did not occur before the Cornerstone estate was established, why it is recommended that the boundary be changed to include the Cornerstone estate, who recommended that the boundary be realigned, and a close attachment to the suburb of Werribee as a place which has been chosen by the residents and ratepayers. So why is option 2 being put forward when the community has indicated strong opposition? The impact of the proposed changes and those concerns around proposed changes and the impact that they'll have on property prices. So these are some of the key questions. Also further, the submitters have asked for the following questions to be responded to in regards to points that they've raised. What are the positive and negative outcomes of the proposal? What are the extraordinary circumstances which require the name to be changed? Were emergency services consulted in the original planning of the suburbs? Whether council had involvement in the section of the Manburn estate in the first instance and why this issue wasn't addressed as part of the planning approval? Were more than the options outlined in the council report considered, such as moving the boundary further to the west where no residents are presently affected? Also raised was the location of the regional rail line in other suburbs and the impact on the Harpley estate, and whether this is the same issue for the Manburn estate. So further questions were, why weren't residents who responded to the survey contacted about the meeting tonight, And will a review of the rates be undertaken of each property impacted by any change? So, Madam Mayor, given the extent and detail of these questions, I've got quite a detailed response. And just for those members of the gallery who have provided these questions tonight, I will go through the response to each of those now, but we will also provide this to you in writing as well. So you've got that detail for your reference as well post tonight's meeting. So in response, Madam Mayor, to those questions that have been raised, I will provide a summary, and as I've said, happy to provide that detail in response, and officers are also available post tonight as well for further discussion and clarification if required. So our contact details will be provided to you with that written advice tonight as well, for tomorrow rather. So those responses will also, just for completeness, be provided to those other interested members in the gallery tonight on our website as well, for those of you who might be interested in the detailed response. So, Madam Mayor, the council report, as councillors have read and also discussed during debate this evening, details the issues addressed in relation to this matter of the suburb realignment proposal, the process followed, and also the outcomes of the consultation and recommendation. The issue has arisen as a result of a request from a developer. This is not a council-initiated process. The Mambrun estate is named the same as the Mambrun suburb, and the estate crosses the suburbs of Mambrun and Wyndham Vale, which will result in the suburb dividing a number of specific properties. The council report outlines the outcome of the consultation with emergency services, statutory authorities, developers, and directly and indirectly affected community members about the proposed realignment and the two options proposed in the previous report, which was considered by council back in February this year. Council does not have control of the names of estates such as Cornerstone Estate or indeed Mambrun Estate, including during any part of the planning process. The state government's geographic naming rules make provision for the naming of suburbs, not estates. Developers are not required to consult emergency services or the community about names chosen for the estates. These names are viewed by the state government as commercial names for business purposes. It is foreseen that having the Mambrun East name extended across the two suburbs, Mambrun and Wyndham Vale, is likely to have long-term negative impacts for residents, businesses, including postal and delivery companies, statutory authorities, visitors, emergency services, and the broader community, as there may be confusion about which suburb applies to specific locations within the estate. In undertaking the consultation about the two proposed options, Ambulance Victoria, Police, or VicPol, Victoria Police, Metropolitan Fire Brigade, the MFB, have indicated a preference for option 2 boundary, which includes the Cornerstone Estate. Their support is on community safety grounds, including to ensure that in the event of an emergency, services can be dispatched to the correct location as soon as possible. And of course, councillors, these were some of the issues debated this evening. The naming rules give precedence to the importance of the boundaries being drawn in ways which promote community safety. Council's policy aligns with this key principle. The arguments put by Ambulance Victoria and the support by the MFB, VicPol for option 2 emphasise the importance of community safety objectives. It is the clear opinion of these authorities that option 2 will over time be more suitable to support such objectives. As stated in the council report, the experience and expertise of these agencies in terms of the implications where there is indeed ambiguity and confusion regarding where people are located at times of an emergency is a vital consideration and really required to fulfil the extraordinary circumstances in this instance of the need for a boundary to be realigned. The respondents, which relate to the Cornerstone estate, clearly do not support the proposal for option 2. However, the report acknowledges this, but recommended option 2 as a result of the feedback from the emergency services is recommended and indeed now resolved with regard to community safety matters. The report also notes that with regard to the comments by residents and ratepayers, the emotional connection with a suburb and property prices are not a consideration under the state government's naming rules. In response to the other questions raised, I advise that I've got a number of dot points here. Firstly, the alignment of the suburb boundary is as the result of a request from a developer, as I said earlier. This is not a council-initiated process. The Cornerstone estate was established prior to the Mamburn estate development. The boundary of the suburb of Werribee has been in place for many years before the naming rules were established. We cannot be sure what process was in place when this boundary was originally established and whether emergency services were in fact contacted or consulted at that time as part of that decision-making or naming process. Council has consulted on the 2 boundary options after considering the alternatives and consulting Geographic Names Victoria prior to proposing the options in the report to Council in February. The office's report details a response in relation to the 3rd option raised by the developer. There was an opportunity on the feedback forms for other options to be raised, so they were able to be considered. The location of the regional rail line has been proposed to be an appropriate boundary in the instance given the proposal to amend the boundary. So that, in fact, has been considered in this instance. In the other suburbs, the regional rail line is not used primarily due to historical reasons, as other boundaries have been in place for many years. The impact on the Harpley estate is not the same as the Mamburn estate because the Mamburn estate has the same name as the suburb. This is not the case for the Harpley estate. Council publishes the agenda on the website on the Friday before the meeting. The council meetings are filmed and made available to the public live and after a meeting. The council report details the next stage of the process, being that council to write to all objectors and a 30-day objection period applies. Geographic Names Victoria will then consider the request. Following the registrar's approval, a notice will be included in the Government Gazette. This process is expected to take 30 to 60 days if no further objections are received. The final step would be for council to write to all affected residents and ratepayers, providing confirmation of the new boundary location if approved. In regards to rates, and this was certainly something that was clearly identified in those questions and comments raised by residents, the valuation of properties are reviewed annually through an independent valuer, which is appointed by the Valuer General. The next process for this will actually be next year, so in 2020. The outcome of this review will be available when the rates notices are sent mid-next year. As I said earlier, Madam Mayor, this is a summary of those issues raised, albeit a detailed response has been sort of verbally provided by me and will certainly be followed up in writing by all of those residents, 14 in fact, some of whom are here this evening in the gallery. All submitters of the public questions will receive the response in writing, and as I said, it will also be published on Council's website. So that goes in some way to addressing those issues raised this evening. Madam Mayor, I also think in conclusion, it's just important to note, certainly for the benefit of the gallery this evening and for those members of the public who have provided questions, is that question time doesn't provide any formal process or input into council decision-making process. Question times are held at the end of a meeting and they're not able to inform council decision-making. That's why we have consultation processes and other things that do inform council decision-making. So I understand that, you know, that is the way that the Local Government Act works, and indeed council's local meeting procedure, local law as well. So just for clarity, I think it's really important to note that as well, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam CEO, for that very detailed response. Do we have any other questions from the gallery this evening?
Madam Mayor, changing tack somewhat, we do have one more question this evening. Could I ask if Mohammed Awis is in the gallery this evening? Thank you, Mohammed. Mohammed asked a question, Madam Mayor, about flying drones. So I will read this question out and then hand over to our Director of City Operations, Mr. Stephen Thorpe, to make a response. So question is, the flying drones are flown commercially at public parks or reservoirs where CARS's Open Sky app allows safe flying through its map indications, requires City Council permissions for a licensed REPL drones pilot. So there's a range of licensing, I understand, that one needs to go through to be allowed to fly a drone in the area. What is the process and procedure to get a Wyndham City Council permission? And what is the procedural policy to avoid iterative requests? So in other words, if it was to be for flying a drone for 3 months, can you request a permit or approval for 3 months rather than each week or day or so on? For the city, in the case, you need to use the drone in more than one public place and indeed more often. So thank you, Madam Mayor. Quite a complicated question there for a Director of City Operations to respond to.
Yeah, thank you, Madam CEO. Through you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Mohammed. That's a really good question. Wyndham, like most municipalities, has part of its local law that requires a permit or written permission to fly a model aircraft or an aircraft, and in this case, a drone. So the simplest thing, I think, in your case would be to write to council and request permission, written permission, to use your drone on council reserves. Our local law only applies to our reserves, so if you intend to fly on other people's land, you would need their consent. And in that written application, if you give us the information about where and for what period of time you'd like to use that reserve for flying the drone, then we'll respond to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. That's the end of our questions tonight.
Thank you, Madam CEO. Item 11, Councillor Delegates Reports. Item 11.1, Councillors Delegates Reports on pages 106 to 107. The recommendation is on page 107 and the attachments are on pages 108 to 111. Councillors, do I have a mover for this item? Thank you, Councillor Maynard. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Gibbons. Are there any councillors that would like to speak to their report this evening?
Just as submitted, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Maynard. Any other councillors? Thank you, Councillor Marcus.
I'm the Sustainability and Environment Portfolio, and I can't understand why our report's not in here. We had our meeting 2 weeks ago. So I would just like to say that we've been working very hard on climate change and on waste and litter, and just to let everybody know that we are having the War on Waste here in Wyndham on Saturday. If you all wish to come along and see Craig Reed-Castle will be there, and there's already well over 700 people have advised that they're coming, but it will be worth being there, and I just want to congratulate and thank our members of our Environment Committee for the work that they're putting into our war on waste and also into our environment and our waterways. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Maynard. Do I have any other councillors that want to speak to their report? Marcus. Sorry?
You said Maynard.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Councillor Marcus. I apologise. Are there any other councillors that would like to speak to this item? No. I now put it to a vote. All those in favour? Those against? The motion is carried. Item 13, confidential business. Councillor, can I have a mover to suspend standing orders for confidential business? Thank you, Councillor Maynard.
Madam Mayor, I move that pursuant to Section 89(2) of the Local Government Act 1989, standing orders be suspended and this meeting of council be closed to members of the public in order for council to discuss confidential business.
Thank you, Councillor Maynard. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Khan. I now put this motion to a vote. All those in favour? Those against? The motion is carried.
Madam Mayor, I move the motion that recommendations of the closed meeting of council with regard to confidential matters be adopted.
Thank you. Do I have a second now? Thank you, Councillor Khan. I now put this motion to a vote. All those in favour? Those against? The motion is carried. Item 14, close of meeting. I declare this meeting closed at 8:20 p.m. Thank you, councillors. Well done tonight. All very well spoken. Excellent work.